accidentally found my husband's second phone in the car. He said, "It's for work." I nodded and put it back. But a week later, I opened that phone and saw who he had been hiding from me for 10 years. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. The house smelled like coffee and cut grass on the morning everything began to unravel, though I didn't know it yet. We had lived in Millbrook, Ohio for 11 years. A colonial-style house on Sycamore Drive with a porch swing Daniel never sat on and a garden I tended alone. We had a mortgage, a joint checking account, 2 cars, and a 14-year-old daughter named Sophie who played varsity soccer and still occasionally let me braid her hair on Sunday mornings. From the outside, we were the kind of family other people pointed to as proof that ordinary life could be enough. I was a 3rd-grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary. I corrected spelling tests, organized bake sales, remembered every child's birthday. Daniel was a regional sales manager for a medical supply company. He traveled 3 or 4 days a month, sometimes more. I had long ago learned not to count the days he was gone. Counting made it worse. We had been married 16 years. The first thing I noticed, and immediately talked myself out of, was the way he started locking his phone. Not dramatically, just quietly, a 4-digit code where there had been none. I saw it one evening in February when he set the phone face down on the kitchen counter, and I accidentally brushed the screen. The lock appeared. I remembered thinking, when did that happen? Then Sophie called from upstairs about a math problem, and I went to help her, and I forgot. That is the thing about suspicion in a long marriage. It does not arrive as a thunderclap. It seeps in through the cracks in ordinary moments, and you caulk over it because the alternative, the thing the suspicion implies, is too large to hold before dinner. By spring, I had noticed other things. He had started using our second bathroom to shower when he came home late from client dinners. He bought new cologne without mentioning it. He laughed differently at his phone. A soft, private laugh, the kind that belongs to a conversation you're not part of. Once, in March, I walked into the living room and he angled the screen away from me in one fluid motion, the way you do when the movement has been practiced. I said nothing. I told myself I was paranoid, but something had shifted in the architecture of our daily life. Subtle, structural, the way a house settles before the foundation cracks. Then came the Saturday in April. Daniel had taken his car to get the oil changed. He asked me to come pick him up from the shop when it was ready, so I drove the short 2 miles down Route 9 and pulled into the lot. He was already outside, chatting with the mechanic. I opened the passenger side of his car to grab his sunglasses. He always left them on the visor. And when I reached up, my hand caught the edge of something flat and hard lodged between the visor and the roof liner. A phone. Black. Samsung. Different from the iPhone he always carried. I stood there for exactly 3 seconds. The afternoon sun was behind me. The mechanic was laughing at something Daniel said. A truck rumbled by on the road. I turned the phone over in my hands. It was off. No visible damage. Fairly new. This is a work phone, I told myself instantly, desperately. Sales managers have work phones. Of course they do. Daniel came around the hood of the car. He saw the phone in my hand before I could set it back. Something moved across his face, so fast, so controlled. And then it was gone. "Oh, that's the work phone," he said, casually, easily, like the words had been waiting on the shelf for exactly this moment. I nodded. I placed it back between the visor and the roof. "Couldn't find your sunglasses," I said. "They're in the center console," he said. We drove home separately. He talked about dinner. I suggested pasta. The evening passed like all the others, but I had felt the weight of that phone in my hands, and it stayed with me. A small, dense fact I couldn't unfeel. A sales manager, 16 years of marriage, a 4-digit lock that appeared from nowhere. Why would a work phone be hidden in the visor lining? I didn't ask. Not yet. Instead, I started watching. Carefully. Quietly. The way you watch when you already know the answer is going to cost you everything. For the week that followed, I went through the motions of my life with a kind of terrible precision. I taught my third graders long division. I attended Sophie's soccer game on Thursday evening and stood on the sideline cheering in the cold. I made grocery lists, answered emails, folded laundry. I was present in every room of my life and completely absent from all of them. What I was actually doing in every quiet margin of every day was counting. I went back 14 months in my memory, sorting events like a woman sorting receipts after a flood. The locked phone, February, the new cologne, late January, the private laugh. I now placed it earlier, November of last year. The late client dinners had started even before that. I found, to my horror, that the timeline was much longer than the alarm had been. I thought about money. We had a joint checking account and a joint savings account. Daniel also had a personal account. For work reimbursements, he'd always said. I had never questioned it. I was a third-grade teacher who trusted her husband. Now I sat at the kitchen table on a Wednesday afternoon while Sophie was at practice, opened my laptop and looked at what I actually knew about our finances. The joint accounts were healthy, mortgage paid, no debt I could see. But I had never had access to his personal account. I didn't even know which bank it was with. I thought about that for a long time. I also thought about the phone in the visor. He had retrieved it, I realized. By the following Monday, when I found a reason to check Daniel's car, I told myself I was looking for Sophie's jacket. The phone was gone from the visor, gone from the car entirely as far as I could find. He had moved it, which meant he had noticed that I noticed, which meant that somewhere beneath his easy smile and his pasta dinner and his "good night, sweetheart," he was watching me too. That thought frightened me more than anything else. I was afraid. I want to be honest about that. I was 42 years old, a school teacher, 16 years into a marriage that had shaped every practical corner of my life. The house, the finances, Sophie's school district, my sense of who I was in the world. If what I suspected was true, I was standing at the edge of something that would unmake all of it. But fear, I have learned, is not the opposite of action. Sometimes fear is the engine. I made a list, physical, on paper, in the notepad I kept in my nightstand under a novel Daniel had never asked about. I wrote down everything I knew, everything I suspected, and everything I needed to find out. Then I made a second list, what I needed before I could do anything at all. Evidence. I needed evidence, not confrontation, not an emotional scene in the kitchen where he would turn it around on me. "You went through my things? You don't trust me?" And I would find myself apologizing for suspecting him of something he was, in all likelihood, actually doing. I had been married to this man for 16 years. I knew how that conversation would end. No. I needed something solid, something he could not explain away, and I needed to understand our finances before I made a single move. Because if I was right, and this had been going on for years, then the financial picture might be more complicated than I knew. Protecting Sophie, protecting myself, That required information, not impulse. I had a colleague at Lincoln Elementary, a woman named Judith, who had divorced her husband 4 years ago after discovering he'd been hiding debt. Judith had handled it quietly, methodically, and well. She'd used a family law attorney named Rebecca Shore, whose name I had filed away without knowing why. Now I knew why. I did not call Rebecca Shore that week. I was not ready, but I looked her up. Her office was in Columbus, 40 minutes away, far enough from Millbrook that I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. Her firm's website said she specialized in high-conflict divorce and asset discovery. Asset discovery. The phrase settled into me like a key finding its lock. The other thing I decided, I would get back into that phone, the Samsung. Wherever it was now, whatever it took, I would find it. Daniel had moved it, but he still had it. Men like Daniel did not give up their secrets. They relocated them. I just had to wait for him to get comfortable again. I closed my notepad. I slid it back under the novel. I went downstairs and started dinner, and when Daniel came home at 6:15, I kissed him on the cheek and asked how his day was. He told me. I listened. I smiled in all the right places. And I waited. I called Rebecca Shore's office on a Thursday morning in late April from my car, parked in the lot of a Walgreens 3 miles from school. I had thought carefully about the call. I used my cell phone. Daniel did not pay our phone bill and had no reason to see my call log. But I sat in the parking lot rather than making the call at home or at school where someone might overhear. Small precautions. They felt absurd and necessary in equal measure. The receptionist was professional and warm. She scheduled a consultation for the following Tuesday at 10 a.m. She told me to bring whatever financial documents I had access to and to write down a timeline of my concerns. I thanked her and ended the call and sat in the Walgreens parking lot for another 5 minutes, watching a woman load groceries into her trunk across the lot. That was the moment it became real, not a suspicion, a proceeding. I spent the weekend gathering documents quietly. Daniel was home Saturday, so I waited until Sunday when he took Sophie to her soccer tournament 2 hours away. I had declined to come. I said I had papers to grade, which was half true. The moment their car left the driveway, I went to the filing cabinet in the home office we shared and photographed every document I could find. Tax returns for the last 3 years, the mortgage statement, our joint account records, the deed to the house. I did not take anything. I photographed everything with my phone and uploaded it to a Google account Daniel didn't know existed, one I had created on my school laptop during a free period. Then I cleaned the office and graded the papers and had dinner waiting when they came home. I noticed something that Sunday evening. Daniel checked his phone twice at the dinner table. Not his iPhone, but something in his jacket pocket, which he had draped over the back of his chair. He was careful about it. Quick. But I saw the particular angle of his wrist, the brief downward flick of his eyes. There was a second device in that jacket. He had brought it home. I said nothing. I passed the salad and asked Sophie about the tournament and laughed when she described her goalkeeper's spectacular dive into the mud. That night, Daniel fell asleep quickly. He often did after long drives. I lay beside him in the dark for 40 minutes, listening to his breathing even out, slow, deepen. Then I got up, walked barefoot down the hall, and went to the coat closet by the front door where he had hung his jacket. The Samsung was in the interior zip pocket. My hands were steady. I was surprised by that. I carried the phone to the downstairs bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and turned it on. It had a lock, but it was a pattern lock, and Daniel, I knew, was a man of habit. I tried the same L-shaped pattern he used on his iPad, the one I had watched him enter 100 times over the years, without ever thinking to remember it. The phone opened. Later, I would understand that this was the moment. Not finding the phone, not hiring the attorney. This. The moment the screen lit up and I saw what was on it, there was one primary messaging app. Not the default app, but a third-party one, encrypted. I opened it. There was one conversation with a contact saved only as M. I scrolled up. The conversation went back 4 years on this device alone, but the references within it, like I said back when we started, and remember that first trip to Cleveland, made it clear this was not the beginning. I read for perhaps 10 minutes. My back was against the cold tile wall of the bathroom. The house was silent above me. I learned the following things. Her name was Melissa. She worked in Daniel's regional office in Columbus. They had been together, her word in one message was together, for nearly 10 years. She knew about me. She knew about Sophie. She referred to me twice, and the references were not cruel, which was almost worse than cruelty. I was simply the situation, a logistical fact, a weather condition Daniel managed. In one message from 8 months ago, Daniel had written, 2 more years, maybe 3. Then we figure it out properly. She had replied, I've been patient. I'll keep being patient. I turned the phone off. I sat in the bathroom for a long time. Then I put the phone back in his jacket pocket exactly as I had found it, went upstairs and lay back down beside my husband. I did not sleep, but I did not cry either. I was past that. I was somewhere colder and clearer, and in that cold, clear place, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I met Rebecca Shore on a Tuesday morning. Her office was on the 14th floor of a glass building in Columbus, overlooking the Scioto River. She was in her mid-50s with the calm, efficient manner of someone who had sat across from a great deal of pain and learned not to flinch. She listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. Then she asked 3 questions. How long had we been married? Did I have documentation of shared assets? And had I told anyone else? 16 years. Yes. No. Good, she said to all 3 answers. She explained the process with the kind of clarity I imagine surgeons use before operations. Matter of fact, precise, designed to prevent panic. Ohio was an equitable distribution state, which meant marital assets would be divided fairly, not necessarily equally. The length of the marriage worked in my favor. My income, lower than Daniel's, also worked in my favor. The hidden personal account, if it existed, if it contained marital funds, was something her firm had a forensic accountant to investigate. I hired her that day. I wrote a check from my personal savings account, one I had maintained since before the marriage and had never closed. I left her office at noon and sat in my car and ate the sandwich I'd packed and looked at the river for a while. It was the first time in 2 weeks I had felt something approaching calm. I was careful in the days that followed. I did not change my behavior at home. I did not move money, did not pack anything, did not alter a single routine. Rebecca had advised patients, gather information, let the financial investigation run quietly, do nothing that could be interpreted as dissipation of assets or sudden preparation for flight. But Daniel was a perceptive man. I think it was the small things, the way I had stopped reaching for his hand during television, the way I asked about his schedule, not with the old, resigned incuriosity, but with a new, careful attention that he may have read differently than before. Or perhaps Melissa had noticed something. She worked in his office. She knew his moods. She may have sensed a change in how he spoke about home. Whatever the cause, the conversation came on a Friday evening. Sophie was at a friend's house. We were in the kitchen. I was washing dishes, and Daniel was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. A posture I recognized, the one that preceded difficult things. "Is something going on with you?" he said. "What do you mean?" I turned off the tap. "You've been distant, checked out." He paused. "Did something happen at school?" "Long week," I said. "I'm tired." He watched me. I held his gaze and dried my hands on the dish towel and moved to put away a glass. "Caroline." He said my name with a weight that was meant to open me. I had responded to that weight for 16 years. Caroline, in that particular tone, had always meant, "We are close enough that you can tell me things." I had believed that. I had believed it completely. "I'm fine, Daniel," I said. "Really." He let it go. But 2 days later, on a Sunday, my phone rang with a Columbus number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Then something made me. "Is this Caroline Hughes?" A woman's voice, low, controlled. "Who is this?" A pause. "My name is Melissa Corr." She spelled it. "I think you know why I'm calling." I sat down on the edge of the porch swing. The afternoon was warm. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere down the street. "I'm not sure I do," I said. "Daniel told me you found his phone." Another pause, more calculated this time. "I think we should talk, woman to woman, before you do something that hurts everyone." Something that hurts everyone. I noticed the framing. Not before you do something you'll regret, which would have been a threat. Before you hurt everyone. That was a manipulation. I was already hurting. The question was whether I would be the only one. "I don't think that conversation would be useful," I said. Her voice shifted, just slightly, just enough. "Caroline, he's not going to leave. Whatever you're thinking of doing, he has a lot more to protect than you realize, financially. I just think you should understand that before you talk to anyone." There it was. I thanked her for calling. I ended the call. That evening, I forwarded the call record to Rebecca Shore and wrote a single line. She called me, mentioned finances as leverage, possible coordinated pressure. Rebecca replied within an hour. "Noted. Do not engage further. We're ahead of them." I took 3 days off from my plan, not from fear, but because I had learned in 42 years that the body needs to catch up to what the mind has decided. I took long walks. I sat in the backyard in the evenings. I watched Sophie at practice and let myself feel, for a few hours at a time, like a woman who still had ordinary problems. Then I came back. Daniel came home with flowers on a Wednesday. Not a grand gesture, not roses, nothing performative. A simple bunch of white tulips from the grocery store, the kind I had always preferred over anything expensive, a fact he had remembered from years ago and clearly decided to deploy now. He set them on the kitchen counter and said, "Thought you might like these," in a voice that was almost shy, a voice I hadn't heard from him in years. I put them in water. I thanked him. I noticed everything. Over the following 10 days, he was, by any observable measure, the husband I had believed I had for most of our marriage. He came home on time. He sat with Sophie while she worked on a history project and helped her draw a timeline of the civil rights movement with the kind of patient attention that made my chest ache in a complicated way. He suggested we watch the movie we'd been meaning to see for months. He reached for my hand on the couch. I let him hold it. I want to be honest about what that was like, because I think people imagine clarity is easy once you know. It isn't. I knew what he was. I knew what he had done for 10 years, what he was still doing, what he had said to Melissa in those messages about 2 more years, maybe 3. I knew all of it. And still, when he laughed at something on television and the sound was the laugh I had fallen in love with, I felt the pull, not of forgiveness, of grief, of the life I had believed I was living and the distance between that life and the real one. How do you mourn something you're still inside of? But I did not waver. The flowers went in the vase. The hand-holding continued. And under all of it, like a current running beneath still water, the process moved forward. Rebecca's forensic accountant had located Daniel's personal account. It was held at a regional bank in Columbus, not our local bank, and had been active for 11 years. 11 years. 1 year longer than Sophie had been alive. The account had received regular transfers, modest, irregular amounts that would have looked like ordinary personal expenses if you weren't looking for them. The forensic accountant was looking. I received this information in an email I read on my school laptop during my lunch break, in my empty classroom with the door shut. I sat with it for a moment, and then I finished my sandwich. In the 4th week, I called my friend Linda. Linda Marsh had been my closest friend for 9 years. We had met at a school fundraiser and discovered we lived 4 blocks apart and had nearly identical senses of humor and equally low tolerance for nonsense. She was a nurse at Riverside Methodist. She'd seen her share of things. She was not a person who panicked. I invited her for coffee on a Saturday morning while Daniel took Sophie to soccer. We sat in my kitchen with the doors closed, and I told her, not everything. Not the attorney's name, not the forensic accountant, not the financial specifics, but the phone, the messages, Melissa, the 10 years. Linda was quiet for a moment after I finished. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Properly, about 3 weeks. "And how are you?" "I'm functioning," I said. "I'm planning." She nodded. She did not cry for me, which was exactly right. She did not say, "I always had a feeling," or "You're so strong," the things people say when they are processing their own shock more than attending to yours. She asked what I needed. "Someone who knows," I said. "Someone I can call if I'm falling apart who will talk me back to level." "Done," she said. She also said something I have returned to many times since. "The fact that you're not burning the house down tells me you're going to come out of this exactly the way you need to." I didn't know what that meant at the time. I do now. Meanwhile, something in the house had shifted again. Daniel's warmth was still there. The tulips had been replaced by a small, nice bottle of wine, set on the counter with no occasion attached. But underneath it, I could feel the watchfulness. He was charming, and he was also monitoring, checking for cracks, waiting to see if the softening had worked. I gave him nothing useful. I was warm. I was present. I was opaque. And Melissa, who had called me once and received nothing, went quiet. People who are used to winning go quiet when they realize they don't know the score. I let them watch. I let them wonder. And I kept moving forward. They came at me from 2 directions. I suppose I should have expected that. It started on a Tuesday evening, a day when Linda was unavailable and Sophie was staying overnight at her friend Maya's house. A coincidence I have since wondered about. Daniel knew Sophie's schedule better than I often gave him credit for. He may have chosen the evening deliberately. He may not have. It doesn't change what happened. He poured us both a glass of wine after dinner, the nice bottle he had left on the counter, and brought mine to where I was sitting in the living room. He sat across from me rather than beside me. That told me something. Beside me would have been seduction. Across from me was negotiation. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. "Okay," I said. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I recognized from difficult workplace conversations he had described over the years. Arranged, deliberate, projecting sincerity. "I know things haven't been easy between us. I know I've been distracted, absent maybe." He paused. "I've been thinking about whether we should try couples counseling." I held my wine glass. "What made you think of that?" I feel like we're not connecting, and I want to fix that. I think we both have things we could work on." Things we could work on. I sat with that phrase. "I think that could be helpful," I said, and I meant nothing by it in any direction. He relaxed slightly. I watched the relaxation move through his shoulders. "There's also something else," he said. His voice shifted, slightly lower, slightly more careful. "I know you found the work phone in the car a few weeks ago." He met my eyes. "I should have been clearer about it. The company issues them for certain client accounts. There are confidentiality protocols, which is why it has a separate lock. I should have explained that. I'm sorry I didn't." He had constructed a complete explanation, reasonable, professional, unverifiable, unless I had already verified it. I had. Rebecca's team had confirmed that Daniel's company did not issue secondary devices to regional sales managers. They used a unified MDM system, one phone, company monitored. He was lying to my face with the ease of a man who had been doing it for a decade. "I appreciate you explaining," I said. He searched my face. I gave him stillness. The next morning, Melissa called again. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought, let her show me who she is. "I think we got off on the wrong foot," she said. Her tone was different this time, warmer, almost conciliatory. "I'm not your enemy, Caroline. Honestly. I care about Daniel, and I know this situation is complicated for everyone." I said. "I think if you could just step back for a moment and think about what's actually best for Sophie, for your daughter. A divorce is devastating for kids. The disruption, the financial change." She paused here, the pause doing specific work. "Daniel has worked very hard to build what you have, and if things become adversarial, that gets complicated for everyone, for your house, for what you've built together." There it was. Your house. They had discussed this. They had sat together, in her apartment or in his car or over a phone connection, and they had mapped out the pressure points. Sophie, the house, the finances. They had decided she would name the things I might fear losing. What they didn't know was that Rebecca Shore had already filed the initial petition that morning. "Melissa," I said. My voice was even. "I understand what you're doing, and I'd like you to stop calling me." A long pause. Then, "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," I said. "Take care of yourself." I ended the call. I stood in my kitchen for a moment. My heart was beating faster than I would have liked. I will not pretend otherwise. There is something physiologically specific about being threatened by someone who is not technically threatening you. It lands differently. It is designed to. But beneath the accelerated heartbeat, something else was happening. Something that had been building for weeks and now felt almost stable, like a load-bearing wall. I knew what I was doing. I had people helping me do it, and they were scared enough to call me twice. People don't apply pressure to things that aren't moving. I texted Linda. Both of them came at me today. "I'm okay." She replied within 2 minutes. "I know you are. Call me tonight." I called her that evening. We talked for an hour. She made me laugh twice. When I hung up, I sat for a moment in the stillness of my house, Sophie still at Maya's, Daniel not yet home, and let myself feel the fear fully, without pushing it away. It was there. It was real. And it pointed, like a compass, directly toward what I still had to do. Rebecca Shore had advised me to say nothing about the petition until service was complete. The process server reached Daniel at his office in Columbus on a Thursday morning, the second week of May. I was teaching when it happened, a lesson on fractions. 8-year-olds with construction paper and scissors, making visual halves and quarters, holding up their pieces to show me. I stood in front of them and talked about equal parts, and I did not know precisely when the papers were handed to my husband, but I knew it would be that morning. I found out how it went from Rebecca that afternoon. He had called her office within 20 minutes of service. She had taken the call as a courtesy. He was controlled, she said, but thin, like paper that is one fold from tearing. He said there was a misunderstanding. She told him she looked forward to speaking with his counsel. He was home when I arrived that evening. He was sitting at the kitchen table. He had poured himself a scotch, which he rarely did on weeknights. He had not started dinner. The tulips, long since wilted, were gone. The kitchen felt different. Its ordinary warmth evacuated, like a room with a window left open in winter. He looked at me when I walked in. "You filed," he said. "I did. Without—" He stopped, reset. "We didn't even try counseling." "Daniel." I set down my bag. "We both know what was on that phone." The silence that followed had a particular quality, not explosive, something more internal. The silence of a man recalculating all the conversations he had believed he'd won. "Who have you talked to?" he asked. "My attorney." "Who else?" "That's not something I'm going to tell you." He leaned back. The scotch glass turned in his hands. "Caroline, if you go through with this, if you make this ugly, there are going to be consequences for both of us. The house, Sophie's school. I make the majority of our income. You know that." "I do," I said. "So does my attorney." He looked at me differently then, trying to locate who I had become. I watched him search my face for the woman who had quietly folded laundry and clipped coupons and asked no difficult questions. She was gone. I had not announced her departure. She had simply left somewhere between the Walgreens parking lot and the bathroom floor and the conference room I was about to walk into. What I had not told him, what I did not tell him that evening, was that the following morning I had a meeting. Melissa Corr had, in what I can only assume was a catastrophic error of judgment, sent me a text message 3 days after her second phone call. The message said, "I have emails between us going back years. If you proceed with this, Daniel is prepared to contest every asset, and this will take years. Think about what that does to Sophie." She had put it in writing, a message that could be read as coordinated financial intimidation, potentially witness tampering in the context of ongoing legal proceedings. Rebecca had been, when I forwarded it, something close to pleased. The next morning, I drove to Columbus. The meeting was not in a dramatic location. It was in a conference room in Rebecca's office building, with Rebecca beside me and Daniel's newly retained attorney across the table. Daniel was there. Melissa was not present in the room, but she had made herself, through her text, very present in the proceedings. Rebecca's associate laid out what they had: the forensic account analysis, the 11-year personal account with documented transfers, totaling over the marriage an amount that constituted the diversion of marital funds, the timeline of the relationship with Melissa, established through phone records and email metadata, evidence gathered legally through proper discovery, and the text message, introduced last, which Rebecca presented without commentary, placing a printed copy in front of Daniel's attorney. Daniel's attorney read it. He looked at his client. Daniel had gone very still. It is one thing to be caught. It is another to sit in a conference room and watch the architecture of your hidden life laid out in documented order on a conference table, and realize that the person you believed you had managed for 16 years had, in approximately 6 weeks, built a case that left almost no room. He tried once. That account was for business expenses. 11 years of undisclosed transfers, no business correspondence attached, partially used to fund a secondary residence leased in Columbus. Rebecca's associate said it calmly without emphasis, the way you state a fact. The secondary residence. I had not known about that. I learned it in that room. I felt something move through me. Not shock exactly. More like the last piece of a structure clicking into place. Of course there was an apartment. Of course there was. Daniel's attorney asked for a recess. They stepped into the hallway. Through the glass partition, I could see Daniel with his back to me, one hand pressed flat against the wall, his head slightly bowed. His attorney was speaking in a low, rapid voice, the voice of a man recalibrating what he has to work with. Daniel was not responding. He was just standing there, his hand against the wall, absorbing something he could not negotiate his way out of. When they came back in, his attorney said they would need time to review the documentation before responding formally. Rebecca nodded. "Of course," she said pleasantly. I looked at Daniel across the table one last time. He met my eyes for a moment. There was no anger in it. I think we were both past that. There was something closer to recognition, a long, late acknowledgement of exactly who I was. It had taken him 16 years and a conference room in Columbus to see me clearly. We adjourned. In the elevator going down, Rebecca said to me simply, "That went well." I nodded. Outside, the May sun was warm on the Columbus street. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. I had been prepared for that room. I had walked in with documents and a clear mind and a woman beside me who knew exactly what she was doing. And Daniel, who had spent 10 years managing his double life with such confidence, had sat across from me and run out of things to say. What does it feel like when the person you underestimated most turns out to know everything? I took the highway home. I picked up Sophie from practice. I made dinner, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, the kitchen felt like mine. The divorce took 7 months from filing to final decree. I want to say that plainly without dramatizing it, because I think the reality of legal process matters. It is not a single moment of triumph. It is a sequence of appointments and documents and waiting rooms and phone calls, a slow grinding of institutional machinery that eventually, if you have done the work and have the right people, comes out on your side. 7 months. Then it was done. In that time, several things happened. Daniel's attorney, in the first weeks after the conference room meeting, attempted a counter-strategy, claiming that the personal account funds were legitimately business-related and requesting a reduction in potential settlement based on Caroline's failure to contribute equally to marital advancement. It was a legal argument, not a personal one, and Rebecca had expected it. She responded with 3 years of tax documentation showing that my flexible work hours as a teacher had been the structural support that allowed Daniel's travel-heavy career trajectory, that the marriage had functioned as a unit, and the financial benefit of his advancement belonged to the unit, not to him alone. His attorney tried a second angle in the 3rd month, requesting that the Columbus apartment expenses be classified as ordinary business travel costs rather than undisclosed marital fund diversion. Rebecca's forensic accountant disassembled that argument in 11 pages of documented analysis. The apartment had been on a 12-month renewable lease for 6 consecutive years. It contained furniture, personal effects, and joint photographs of Daniel and Melissa. It was a home, not a hotel. Daniel's attorney stopped filing counter motions after that. There is a point in legal proceedings where continued resistance becomes its own kind of damage, and his counsel clearly knew where that line was. The forensic accountant produced a number. Over 11 years, Daniel had transferred approximately $214,000 from marital income into his personal account, funds that had been used for, among other things, the Columbus apartment, vacations that had not included me, and gifts which appeared in financial records as retail purchases. $214,000. I read that number in a document in Rebecca's office, and I thought about all the years I had clipped grocery coupons, all the years I had said, we should be careful this month, and meant it. All the years I had told myself that the modest tightness of our budget was simply the reality of a family with a mortgage and a child, when in fact money had been leaving the marriage in careful, quiet increments for over a decade. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I signed the next document Rebecca slid across the desk. In the settlement, I received the family home in Millbrook free and clear, a substantial portion of the retirement accounts, child support calculated on Daniel's actual income, which, with his bonus structure included, was considerably higher than he had allowed me to believe, spousal maintenance for 5 years, tapering, and legal fees, a portion of which Daniel was ordered to pay given the documented financial misconduct. It was not everything. Settlements never are. But it was enough, and it was fair, and it was legally unambiguous. Daniel moved into an apartment in Columbus. I do not know if it was near Melissa's building. I did not need to know. What I learned about Melissa, because some things make their way back, was this. Daniel's company had launched an internal HR review when the legal proceedings became visible and certain email records were subpoenaed. She'd used a company email account for some of their communication during work hours, a choice that, in retrospect, must have seemed harmless in the years when she believed nothing would ever surface. She was placed on administrative leave pending the review. She resigned before its conclusion. Her LinkedIn profile went dark for several months. When it reappeared, she had listed herself as a consultant, the professional equivalent of a blank page. I did not report her to the company. I did not have to. The proceedings reported themselves. The text message she had sent me, the one warning me about contesting assets, the one invoking Sophie's stability as leverage, had been entered into the legal record. Her attorney, when contacted by Rebecca's office, had advised her to make no further contact with me. She hadn't. Whatever she and Daniel had said to each other in those final weeks, I was not part of the conversation. I had made myself legally untouchable, and they both knew it. The secondary apartment lease had been in Daniel's name only, which meant when the relationship became legally visible, the practical arrangement ended. Melissa lost the subsidy that had made her life comfortable for 6 years. I did not feel satisfaction about this specifically. I felt nothing specifically about Melissa. She had been cruel in a particular way, a way that involved choosing convenience over conscience for a decade, and then reaching for my daughter as a pressure point when convenience was threatened. That is its own kind of sentence, and life tends to hand it down without my involvement. Sophie knew, by the end of summer, I had been careful with how I told her. I did not assign blame in specific terms. She was 14 and she loved her father, and those two things were true and would remain true, and it was not my place to take them from her. I said that Daniel and I had grown apart in ways that were adult and complicated, and that she was loved by both of us completely, and that nothing about our home or her school or her life was going to disappear. She cried. She was angry for a while. At me sometimes, which is the injustice that mothers absorb because they can and because the alternative is worse. Then she was sad. Then she was cautiously okay. She stayed in our house, her house, and continued her soccer season and her friendships and her Sunday braids when she was in the mood. She was a tough kid. She got it from somewhere. On the day the final decree was signed, I drove home from Rebecca's office in Columbus on a clear December afternoon. The fields on either side of the highway were bare and brown, and the sky was pale blue and enormous. I put on the radio, an old station, classic rock, something neither nostalgic nor pointed, and I drove. I pulled into the driveway on Sycamore Drive. My house, my name on the deed. I sat in the car for a moment, long enough to feel the full weight of what had just become permanent. Then I went inside. That was 2 years ago. The house on Sycamore Drive is still mine, and I have made it more mine than it was before. I repainted the living room, a deep green that Daniel would have called a lot, and that I love completely. I finally put furniture on the porch, the kind meant to be used, and I sit there on weekend mornings with coffee and a book and the sound of the neighborhood waking up. Birds first, then cars, then somewhere down the block a dog who has strong opinions about squirrels. The garden was always mine. Now it is simply mine without the invisible asterisk. Last spring, I added a raised bed along the south fence. Tomatoes, 2 kinds of basil, a row of sunflowers that Sophie said were kind of extra, and then quietly photographed for her Instagram. I spent a Saturday in April with my hands in the soil and the radio on through the open back door, and I thought, this is what it feels like when a space belongs to you entirely, not claimed, not defended, just yours. I am still teaching at Lincoln Elementary. I was offered a curriculum coordinator role this past spring, part administrative, part mentorship. I took it. A small raise, more responsibility, the kind of weight you choose rather than inherit. I now mentor a newer teacher named Dana on Tuesday afternoons. 24 years old, enormously talented, terrified of parent-teacher conferences. Helping her find her footing has given me something I didn't know I was missing, the satisfaction of passing something forward. My third graders sent me a card on the last day of school with their handprints pressed in different colors. I framed it and hung it in the hallway where a large mirror used to be. One I had never especially liked. The handprints are better. Sophie turned 16 in October. She's taller than me now, which still surprises me when she walks into a room. She made varsity starting lineup and her team placed second at regionals, which she has informed me is basically first but with more character building. Her friends come over on Friday evenings and take up the whole living room, and I feed them pizza and retreat to the porch and feel in those moments a contentment that is hard to describe. Not the contentment of things going perfectly, the contentment of things being real. She sees Daniel regularly. Weekends, the arrangement that is held without major incident. He is, by Sophie's account, trying. He was passed over for a regional director promotion he had been tracking for 2 years. Sophie mentioned it neutrally. I asked how he seemed. She said, "Okay, I guess. Kind of quieter." I hope he finds his footing. Sophie loves him, and what affects him affects her, and that makes it matter to me in a specific and bounded way. I heard through Linda that Melissa had taken a position with a smaller company in Cleveland, and that her relationship with Daniel had not survived the year following the proceedings. I was not surprised. Relationships built inside secrecy tend to collapse when the secrecy is removed. The concealment was the architecture, and without it, nothing structural remains. She is starting over at 38 in a smaller professional world. I feel very little about this. She made her choices for a decade and is living inside them now. Linda has been a constant. We have dinner every other week, alternating houses. She came with me to a concert in Columbus last spring, and we stood in a crowd on a warm evening, and it was completely ordinary and entirely good. Last fall, I met a man named Grant. He teaches high school history. He is patient and self-aware, with a dry humor that takes a moment to arrive. He remembers small things. The name of my difficult parent from last semester. The fact that I dislike cilantro with a conviction he finds disproportionate and gently teases me about. We've been careful with each other the way two adults are careful when they've learned that love is not something you fall into, but something you build, slowly, with attention and honesty. Sophie has met him twice and reported back, he seems pretty normal. From Sophie at 16, this is generous. I am happy, not the happiness of vindication, quieter and more durable than that. The happiness of a woman who looked at the worst information she had ever received, did not flinch, and rebuilt something true from the ground up. The porch swing, the one Daniel never once sat on, I use almost every day. There is something very specific about reclaiming a space someone else left empty. You fill it differently, better. The garden is coming in well. Sophie says she wants to help with the tomatoes this year. I told her to come over Saturday morning. I'll have coffee ready. If there is one thing this taught me, it is this. Do not mistake stillness for weakness. I was quiet for weeks. I was warm and I was present and I was planning. And that composure was not passive. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. If you find yourself standing at the edge of something enormous and frightening, find one person you trust. Find the right professional, and then move forward step by step in the cold, clear light of what you actually know. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, please subscribe. It means more than you know.